And welcome back. Now, I know we have many project management professionals out there, and it's always great to hear from you. It's great to hear from all of our audience. We really have enjoyed your interactivity all day. Thank you for your questions. Thank you so much for all your great comments as well. And it's great to hear that you're enjoying it, that we're adding value to you, and that it really makes a difference to listen to many of the experts indeed from around the world, and to all of you, our dear audience, from around the world. Really, it's been great. You've been telling us where you're signing in from and indeed what you're enjoying. So that's really, really good. Now, this is our last session of the day, so I'm very, very excited about this. And we have been bringing you some great detail and information from the Project Management Institute and getting a lot of great feedback from that. And of course, you all know the project management body of knowledge. It's, this guide is just, it's been the go-to guide very much for so many people when we look at project management out there. And indeed, I think we're beginning to realize that project management is the essential way of the future, really something in there for all of us. So this conversation is something that will be of great interest to you. Our project management professionals, of course, will earn 1 PDU for this session. So again, get some questions in on this, because we will have an opportunity to talk to our speakers after this, and the code will be put up there in the chat box throughout the session. So keep an eye out for that. So the standards project specialist from the Project Management Institute, Marvin Nelson, will do a presentation here, as will Nader Rad also, and he's the development team member from the Project Management Institute. So I'm going to hand it over to them both, and really will enjoy listening to this and just see what is the future for the project management body of knowledge, the PMBOK guide. So let's hear to what they say, and we'll be back for Q&A shortly.
Welcome. We're so glad to have this opportunity to speak with you today about a great transformation that's happening with the PMBOK guide and the 7th edition. What we want to talk to you today about is an overview of the changes that are planned. So at the outset, I need to tell you that we're not done. We're getting close, but this is preliminary information and it's still subject to change. But we wanted to share this information for your awareness and to give you an idea of what the 7th edition PMBOK guide and the standard for project management will look like. We'll have to say that there will be views and opinions presented, and those are of the presenters and not necessarily of PMI. So important to understand that there are actually 2 books that get bound together. The first is the standard for project management, and this is the actual standard and is what carries the American National Standards Institute designation as a US standard. The second part is the actual guide to the project management body of knowledge. And here it is a guide to the knowledge. It is not in any way implying that all of the knowledge has been captured in this one book. But we do want to kind of walk through how the structure is changing, what the content is looking like. And so we want to give you a quick tour, and Nader is going to do that for us. Nader, go ahead.
Thanks, Marvin. Thanks. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. I hope you will enjoy it. Also, thank you to all the organizers, Edna, and the rest of the team. So, as Marvin said, I'm going to give you a real quick tour of everything that we have in the PMBOK Guide 7th edition. This is the structure. And as Marvin said, there are 2 different main sections here. We have the standard and the guide. And each of them has 3 parts. I'm going to tell you about them. Let's just start with the standard. The first part in the standard is the introduction, obviously, the part that not many people read, so that's okay. After that comes something special, the value delivery system. It's something new, and we have this section because we talk a lot about value in the 7th edition of the PMBOK guide. And here we describe the overall system that governs value in our projects. Now, when it comes to larger projects, especially construction, process plant projects, oil and gas projects, you are probably thinking about an issue that we have, which is about the fact that value management is not limited to what we have in the project. It must be through all layers of program management, portfolio management, and project management. Because one issue that we have here is that in smaller projects, especially in small IT projects or organizations that have only one main product, their whole value management system can be done in their project boundaries, which is great, really. But for the rest of us, that's not even possible, because the value of a process plant, that's really connected to our transportation system and other process plants that will be using outputs of our plants and a lot of other things. You know about many of those, especially when the main clients may be a local government or something like that. Then all different projects that they have in the same portfolio together make sense when we think about value. So does it mean that we shouldn't take care of value in our projects? No, because we still have to support that whole ecosystem. That's one thing. We need to understand what's going on and how we can contribute to creating value, the co-creation of value. And there's also something else. It's not only about the project as a whole, but it's also about what we do as individuals or teams in subsets of the project. We can always improve the value of what we do in the project in a bottom-up approach, which is something that complements the top-down approach that we have to value management. For example, something that I experienced myself in process plant projects when I was working in them was that I had this idea to improve my schedules. In the beginning, I was a project planner. Normally, my projects had maybe 6,000, 7,000, or 8,000 activities in them. But then I had this idea for a better schedule. And in the next project, I implemented the idea. And the consequence was that my schedule suddenly had about 120,000 activities. You can imagine how difficult it is to create a schedule like that, but more importantly, what a nightmare it is to maintain that, to keep that up to date all the time and extract the information that we need. So practically after 5 or 6 months, I gave up and I replaced that schedule with something normal that had 8,000 or 9,000 activities. And the problem there was value. I was still getting a lot of good things from that huge plan, but it was not enough to justify the amount of effort that we had to put into that. The value was not high enough. And the same thing can happen in everything that we do. Think about if you're not a project manager, if you're involved in one subset of the project, think about the things that you do and the value that you deliver. This section of the standard is all about that. So the next one is principles. Now, the biggest and most important change in the 7th edition of the PMBOK guide is that instead of being process-based, as it has always been, now it is principle-based. It's a great change. And what it means is that instead of starting by talking about processes and the things that we have to do in our projects, we start by talking about the way we are supposed to do things, the principles that apply to everything that we do in our project. And the interesting thing here is that it doesn't matter what type of project we have, the principles still apply. So it may be a predictive plan-based project, as we normally have in a construction project, process plant, or oil and gas project, or it may be an adaptive agile project. Still the same principles apply. Maybe small or large, sensitive or life critical even, or just simple, they apply to all of them. However, the way they apply to those projects are different. Principles can be interpreted in different ways. So it's up to you to understand your project and see how you want to take advantage of the principles. Now, we don't have a lot of time to go through all the principles, so I'll show you these are the principles, but as Marvin mentioned, not everything is finalized. It's still the latest draft that we have, so the names may be different when the PMBOK guide is published. But this is what we have now. So as an example, if you take a look at the first one, what do you think about? It's about one of the problems that we have. The problem that we have is that many project managers or many people in positions like project managers think of themselves as being a boss for everyone else. That's not the most productive thing that we can have in the project. We have enough bosses all the time. What we really need to have in our projects are people who facilitate, who enable the project, who support people in the project, people who are good stewards. That's about the first principle. As an example, let's take principle number 5 about systems interactions. That's one of my favorites, really. It's about thinking holistically whenever it comes to the project. Now, what does it mean? The easiest example is probably change management. What you usually have in your projects as change management is that you receive the request and you make sure that you understand every consequence of that change. You consider every consequence before making a decision. It's about having a holistic perspective to the project. Now we can have the same thing in everything else. For example, the common issue that we have nowadays is that people go and read about a certain approach to project management, and they like something in that method, and then they bring it to their own system, regardless of the fact that that little thing that they saw in that system makes sense only when it's a whole system, and it is part of a system. When you bring it to your own, it may work in a different way. It's not about cherry picking, it's about having a consistent system that works for you. There are other things as well. We have to consider the non-linear behavior of the elements in our project, because really projects are complex. And the other thing that I really like about this one is that we need to be critical thinkers. We need to be aware of our cognitive biases. Our cognitive biases are different things that fool us when we want to make decisions in our projects. And we are fooled all the time. It's not about some people, it's about everyone, including myself. The common cognitive biases that you are probably familiar with are the halo effect, the sunk cost effect, the anchoring bias. There are many of them. And one of our principles is to take care of those things, be aware of them and try to control them. And by the way, if you're interested, there are a lot of resources about critical thinking, and they're really useful for projects. There are even books about critical thinking for project managers. Think about it. So that was another example. The last example I will give you about principles is, or can be, let me see, 11, embrace adaptability and resiliency. Being adaptive is important, but it has different meanings. What it means is that you change something in order to adapt to your environment. And that's all we do in projects. We have a project environment, and we don't do things based on an ideal that we have in our mind. We consider the environment, we change our form. Based on the new form, we will receive feedback from that environment, and if it's not good enough, we will change it again. We adapt. Like, I don't know, animals in nature, the way they adapt. Now, there are two aspects to adaptation. One of them is about adapting the product, which is something special, something mainly for the Agile projects. But still, lower levels of adaptation can be used in every type of project, something you may want to consider. But the other aspect that is more important for us is adapting the processes, adapting the way we work. That's different from the product we create. And that type of adaptation, which is practically adaptation for our project management method, that applies to everything, to every type of project. So these were the principles, and I gave you 3 examples of them, which is, okay, here. Yeah, so that was the 3rd section in the standard. Now, when we go to the guide, we have, again, 3 other sections. The first one is the performance domains. Performance domains are a new concept that we have here in the PMBOK guide. And it's more or less like the knowledge areas, but they are not the same at all. They are different from many different perspectives. And one of them is that, think about the knowledge areas, because you're probably familiar with the PMBOK guide. When you think about the knowledge areas, they are mainly focused on helping people get certain outputs that we need in our projects. Performance domains are different in that they are focused on helping you get outcomes, certain outcomes instead of outputs, which makes them interesting, I think. These are the domains. And again, I won't go through all of them, just a few examples. The first one, planning. It's important to remember that we always need to have planning. Whenever we have a project, we need to have planning. And it doesn't matter what type of project we have, because nowadays, some people who are overexcited about Agile and don't know Agile very well think that we don't need to have planning in Agile, which is not the case. We do have planning in Agile. The only thing is that the type of planning that we have is different. So again, a few things that we have to remember here is that we always need to have planning. And the second one is that the type of planning depends on the project that we have. And by the way, if you really want to compare it with knowledge areas, the planning that we have here covers the planning of all knowledge areas. The second one about the life cycle, that's also interesting, I would say. The project life cycle is a subset of the product life cycle. And then inside that, we have a lot of things to consider. We have different phases from start to finish. We have to think about all of them, the best life cycle that we can have in our project. And then in a different not a different domain, in a different level, independence of the life cycle, but really related to that. I couldn't say independent, they are dependent, but they are not the same concept. We have other things like the way you want to deliver your products. Are you going to deliver everything at the end of the project, or are you going to have different phases and deliver major things in the middle of the project? Or even like some Agile projects, you want to have really frequent deliveries, maybe even up to once a week. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on your product, the product that you're creating. Each product has a nature, and it determines a lot of things here in our life cycle. Also, everything else that you have in the environment of your project. They all impact the delivery method that we have here. The delivery method or delivery approach is the way we create the product. It may be predictive, like the way we do in construction and similar types of project, where we create a plan upfront, we try to optimize everything, we try to understand all the possible problems and prevent them from happening, because that's the best way of doing that in that type of project. That's one approach. The other approach is adaptive or agile, where we cannot really understand the relationships between the product and the market or its environment. And therefore, we have a really simple plan, and we go on. And instead of using a plan to find our way, we use adaptation to find our way. We create pieces of product. We created an environment in which people can use the product, generate feedback, and we will use that feedback to find our way. So these are all options that we have to consider depending on the type of project and its environment. And all of them are covered here in this domain about life cycle. The other domain here that I really like is number 5 about measurements. Monitoring your project. What are you going to measure? That's also a common problem, to be honest, because many of us don't measure the correct thing. We measure things that are really weak proxies for the ultimate goal that we have in the project. Normally, for example, in a predictive project, the best measurements are our forecasts. What's going to be the amount of money we need to finish the project, or when is our project going to be finished? But instead of that, people are more focused on comparing the actual values with the planned values. Those are necessary, but those are only things that we need in order to get into those final real measurements. These are not the final outputs that we need for decisions in our different levels of management. So this domain is all about measurements, proper measurements, and the way they can contribute to our projects. Okay, so that was the performance domains, which is the first section in the second part of the book. After that, we have a whole chapter about tailoring. You know that we always keep talking about the importance of tailoring. It has always been there in the PMBOK guide, but this time we've gone further and we have a lot more information about the way you can tailor your projects, which we really hope would be useful to everyone. In this part, we have considered 2 main levels for tailoring. One of them is in the project, in the organization level. That's where you partially tailor your system and create one or a few partially tailored systems for different types of project that you have in your organization, because you don't want to do it every time for every project. Most projects that you do are probably similar to each other. But we still consider the fact that not every project is the same. So the second level is about tailoring for the project. That's where you get one of those partially tailored things from your organization level and then fully tailor it for your project. And again, if you remember the principles, this has a lot to do with having a holistic approach to the project, as well as many other principles. Really, all principles impact everything else that we have in the PMBOK guide. And finally, we have this section about models, methods, and artifacts in the PMBOK guide. In my opinion, maybe the rest of the team won't agree with me, but in my opinion, this is more like a teaser that tells you about different things that may be useful to you in your projects, different models, different methods, and different artifacts. It doesn't give you a lot of information about them. It doesn't give you enough information to go and use those things, but it mentions them and gives you a really short description. And our hope is that you will see something and say, oh, this may be useful to my project. Let me go and check it out somewhere. That's the last section. So this is the whole content. And something else that I didn't mention is that the whole book will be a lot smaller than before, in case you were worried about that. And let me go to the next slide. I forget where to click to go to the next slide. That's why it takes time sometimes. Okay, so a quick overview of everything that I told you. Here we have the context of the project, the environment in which we use the project, we run the project, different elements that there are. And inside here, we have the principles that have to be considered in everything we do. And then the concrete things that we use are the domains, which help us think about the outcomes that we want. And then in order to become even more concrete, as you see, we have different levels of abstraction here. We become more and more concrete here. In the last part, we will have different models, methods, artifacts, and processes. And in case you've been wondering, the processes that we used to have in the 6th edition of the PMBOK guide, they are not part of the PMBOK guide anymore, but we have this new concept of PMI Standards Plus. PMI Standards Plus is an online platform, and the content in that is completely dynamic. There may be new articles every day. And that's the new home for the processes that we used to have in the PMBOK guide, the knowledge areas, the process groups, and so on. What we have in the new version of the PMBOK guide are the content that I just told you about. Now, the other difference is that Standards Plus will be the place where we will make everything more concrete. So we have the one principle, for example, the principle about adaptation, and then we come to the Standards Plus and talk about the way this principle can make sense for construction projects, for IT projects, for process plant projects, for research projects, and so on. Or we have a certain domain about, I don't know, measurement. Now, here in the Standards Plus, we will have detailed, concrete content about the way you can do measurements, for example, in a construction project. So that was all. I hope it was helpful to you. And Marvin and I are ready here to answer your questions. Thank you.
And thank you so much. Thank you, Nader, there. And indeed, thank you to Marvin. And I'm delighted you're both with me here for this Q&A. Really in-depth analysis of the big changes that had happened there. And Marvin, if I might start with you, listening to all of that, to the tremendous changes that are there, what actually drove, this big change, a radical change? Quite honestly, when we look at that guide that was there for so long, and now we're looking at it, so the new and improved PMBOK. Tell me a little bit more about it.
Sure. Between each revision that we do, there's obviously research going on, but in this case, there was a lot of intense research. We looked across, market studies, academic papers, just a wide breadth of information. And what we started to see is things are changing, and not surprisingly so. We just need to address them, right? So change itself is happening faster. We're talking more and more about a global marketplace, not a local marketplace. And technology continues to be our friend and our enemy. And so all of these things were changing, and it forced us to take a step back and say, how does that impact projects? What does that mean for our future? And then we went to focus groups and said, how do you want this to help you in your day-to-day job? And so all of that came together, and we began to formulate this new vision of providing options, providing flexibility in the process of managing projects, and do it in a way that puts our focus not on doing, but on what's the outcome we're trying to achieve. And so that's what we hope to accomplish in this next edition.
And that is, it's exciting in so many ways to really, I suppose, moving with the times, so to speak. Nader, you gave us such great detailed information there and analysis in terms of what you did, but talk to us a little bit more about how you moved from I suppose, a process-based approach to a more principle-based approach?
Well, that was a big decision. And it's an approach that I really like. It's, I would say, a really great change, because mainly now we can truly support every type of project. Before, some people could say that the process-based approach, because of all the details that we had in the processes, could be biased towards certain types of projects. I don't know. But now it's a lot easier to support every type and help people who are working in every industry. And more importantly, you know, what you create and the potentials that your creation has, it's one thing. And the possible misuse is something else, the misunderstandings that can happen. If you're 100% expert, things may be different. But there are many people using the PMBOK guide, and for some of them, maybe there was some misunderstandings. Now, we take it as our own responsibility to make it in a way that doesn't create any misunderstandings. And I personally believe that the principle-based approach gives us an opportunity to prevent a lot of misunderstandings that may be common in some projects. I don't know, Marvin, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that it's a good point. And the other thing I think we see in this shift is this move away from it's about one person, one role, really trying to dictate, if you will, an outcome or an output. And it expands to a way that the entire project team and all those associated with the project become involved and invested in what it is we're trying to deliver. It's more than a artifact. It's more than a thing. It's about driving value and realizing intended outcomes from the work. And so I think the principles anchor us as and unify us as a project team.
And that's very exciting, Marvin. I think that's ultimately what you have to do. You also had talked about, Marvin, you talked with focus groups, and you know they told you in terms of day-to-day. But a question that has come in terms of how did you validate the effectiveness of this change, or you were more reactive to what people were telling you? Marvin, talk to me about that a minute.
Yeah, so early on, we started conducting a number of workshops around the world. And those workshops were to help to start to elicit what are these core principles? How can we get our hands around them, our arms around those, right? As the development team started their work, those workshops then shifted to validate what we are hearing. And so then we got additional feedback. The other piece is, as we developed the content, the development team would take a piece of that. So Nader talked about the various sections. Each section would be written and exposed to a subject matter expert group to really digest and give us feedback. The development team would take that, work with it, adapt, revise, and then we put it back out to another group as a unified whole. Here's a project draft. Tell us, what do you think? And we got a lot of great feedback. So we used a very iterative development approach to keep validating that we're on the right path and we're getting to what we wanted to achieve.
Nader, if I may ask you, when we look at earned value and the calculations, talk to me a little bit about, you know, will that earned value be there? Is that still in the 7th edition?
We've had mentions of that in the previous versions as part of different processes because of the connection that we have between that and cost and time and scope management. In this version, we don't have those processes, but there's this section about models, methods, and artifacts that I mentioned. And earned value management is one of the things that are mentioned there. But something that is important to consider here is that the PMBOK guide is not a resource for learning what earned value management is. It's just a guide that tells people where they can use earned value management if they want to use it in order to make it effective. Now, before that was in the context of processes, but now it's in the context of models, methods, and artifacts. And then the last thing that I mentioned in the presentation, there's also this platform, Standards Plus. So there, people can find a lot more details about all of these things. For example, what does it mean when we talk about earned value management if you are working in a construction project, or if you're working in some other type of project? There will be a lot of information there.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It really does look like a tremendous guide, without a doubt there. One question for you, Marvin, and obviously from a student. Once the PMBOK 7 is released, will the PMP exam be based on the version 7, or will there be a grace period for which the exam will continue to be based on version 6?
Yeah, so I think it's important, especially for those candidates trying to get their certification right now and knowing that there is a change in the exam coming January of next year, to know that the 6th edition still remains one of the resources that informs those exam questions, right? Yes, down the road, there will be a point where the exam will update because the 7th edition is published, but that will take time. So for now, PMP candidates should continue to work with the 6th edition. And I would stress, as one resource, there are multiple resources that go into an exam. And so don't narrow it down to just the PMBOK guide. That's not the only one.
Yes, indeed. I can imagine so many, a lot of study to be doing before you're going to get there. Nader, talk to me about how is the Agile Guide and Disciplined Agile Toolkit supported, actually, question that came in here, by the PMBOK, the 7th edition?
I would say they are in two different levels of abstraction, if you will. The PMBOK guide is a high-level guide that helps every type of project, and that means predictive projects as well as agile projects, but it doesn't go into all the details that you have in agile projects. When people need to have the details, they can use the discipline agile information or anything else. Those things will provide all the details. And what the PMBOK guide does here is that it helps them work with the high-level aspects of those projects and make them more effective. That's the goal. So it's not about those details. Those are more about the details and things that are specific to some of the projects. But the other thing that we have here is that they should be compatible as well, the way it is created.
So Marvin, if we were to, look at I mean, as you say, a huge difference in the guide, but also the industry has really changed. People's approach has changed. And in many of our panels, there was talk about the concept of the need for a mindset change, not just in project management, but in terms of how people generally, approach projects and approach, I think, also in the post-COVID world. I'm sure a lot of that was taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, although it was interesting because we started the development work well before COVID-19 hit, right? But it was like there could be no better example of needing to be flexible and adaptable than when that hit. And it did change the way we worked. And now if we look back, we can say, wow, we really did, I think, hit on something in saying, let's establish the principles in the standard. Let's anchor on the principles. What is it that we need to be thinking about? And let those inform our actions and behaviors when we're doing project work. And so in doing that, when we had to suddenly shift to a very much a virtual collaboration approach to everything we're doing, it's in there. It's helping to guide that shift rather than being anchored in some specific way or process or formula. It allowed for the flexibility on the part of the project team to really adjust to the impact of COVID, as an example.
Yes, and again, I think it was unexpected, and people really had to react. And I think what happened, they did react. Just a follow-up, if I may keep you just a moment on this one, Marvin. How long will it be until the exams will be aligned with the 7th edition? Do you have a time frame in mind, or should everybody be looking at the 7th edition from now on?
Well, there isn't a specific time frame yet, and part of that is because I keep saying it's not published. You know, as we're stressed, we're still finishing it up. So until it's really published, nobody is going to draw content from it, right? So I don't know when, if that means late 2021, you might start to see some content. That will be determined once we get to a firm publication date.
But it's so just watch this space. It's all happening, and it'll be very exciting when people can keep an eye on it. Nader, just to close off, if I might come back to you for some closing words on this. But when we think of it, still the principles of project management, you know, still the very vital principles. You've changed a lot in this, but there are some core fundamentals, I would imagine, that are there. So just round us off and just tell us what we need to be mindful of and what we really need to be keeping at the very core of what we do when we look at project management.
Well, that's really what we try to do when we're capturing those principles and preparing them. Our goal was actually addressing the exact same question you just posed. And that's our answer there. If you want to have a successful project, you have to be careful about valuing your project. You have to be careful about the way you work with your team and so on. I would say it's hard to say there's just one thing that people have to consider or 3 most important things. What we have in project management is really about integrating a lot of different things. Marvin, do you have a better answer for that?
You know, I was just saying, one thing that we had as a mantra that might be helpful here is that we kept coming back to, as the development team was working, to say, lead people manage projects. Lead people, and that's what it's about.
And I think that's a lovely way to close it off too. It's a very, very positive message to send out there. Yes, lead people, manage projects. That's a lovely line. So from both of you, thank you so much, Nader Rad and Marvin Nelson, both from the Project Management Institute. I really want to thank you so much for bringing us up to date on that 7th edition. And of course, we'll all be keeping an eye out for it. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.